As those closest to 4 Pepperdine University students continue to deal with their loss, the man accused of taking their lives in a fatal crash has asked the court for a lower bail. Court TV's Julia Janae has more details on the sorority sisters murder case.
October 17th, 2023, 4 Pepperdine University sorority sisters are killed in a horrific car accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. Neve Rolston, Asha Weir, Deslyn Williams, and Peyton Stewart were all seniors and members of the Alpha Phi sorority. Prosecutors say they were killed when 22-year-old Fraser Michael Bohm lost control of his BMW while speeding through Malibu.
On October 17th at around 8:30 p.m., Mr. Bond was allegedly speeding at the speeds of 104 miles an hour on a 45-mile-an-hour zone on PCH when he lost control of his BMW. He allegedly crashed into a parked car before crashing into 4 pedestrians standing together on the side of the roadway.
Bohm was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and manslaughter stemming from their deaths. Local station KABC was in the courtroom last month when Bohm made his first court appearance with his new attorney, Alan Jackson.
Before the entry of a not guilty plea, which is what we expect, obviously, I would ask the court for 1 continuance of the arraignment. We have just been brought on the case as of the last about 48 hours.
Jackson was Karen Reed's lead attorney in her trial earlier this year, which ended in acquittals for the murder and manslaughter charges she faced. Bohm's defense is expected to be that he was fleeing a road rage incident at the time of the wreck.
As far as another vehicle that's involved, we haven't been aware of anything like that. If there is anybody out there that actually has some information about that, or it was maybe a witness to it, I encourage you to contact the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department.
The defendant, Fraser Michael Bohm, and his attorney, Alan Jackson, were back in court earlier this week. They were requesting to lower his bond from $4 million to $2 million, which would free up funds for an expert-intensive defense. Here's the judge's response to that motion.
There are many, many defendants sitting in the county jail right now who would love me to reduce their bail so they can hire Alan Jackson or other private counsel, but that's not the way it works. If Mr. Bohm cannot afford Mr. Jackson's services, he is free to find other private counsel, or he can request the appointment of the public defender if he qualifies for their services, which, despite being free, is oftentimes excellent.
Bohm's request was denied, but he is due back in court next month. So this morning, we're asking, how accommodating should the judge be for a fair defense? Why don't we go ahead and bring in our guest to discuss. The chief of police at Talladega College and retired homicide detective Chris Anderson. Also family law attorney Jennifer Brandt. Good morning to you. As well as criminal defense attorney David Bruno. Hey there, David. I'm going to start with you this morning. All right, we just heard what the judge's response was to the motion brought forth by Alan Jackson. What's your take on the response and what Alan Jackson asked for?
Yeah, this is the reason why across this entire country, bail has being reformed. In my state, in New Jersey, we certainly have, in my state, we have modified that away from monetary bail to look at risk assessments because, we don't want defendants, and this is the extreme, obviously. This is a serious case and it's a very high bail, but there are many defendants across the entire country that are still in jail because they don't have the financial resources to come up with bail. And that is the reason for reform, to look at risk assessment. What is this defendant's prior history? Does he have a history of failure to appear? What are the facts and circumstances, which are also relevant, don't get me wrong. But when we talk about detention of a defendant during the pendency of cases, we want that to be whether or not they are a flight risk, whether or not there's a danger to the community, and whether or not there's a destruction of evidence. And in New Jersey, something like that wouldn't happen just because of bail. It would be on the risk assessments. And certainly there still could be detentions based on facts and circumstances. But that's why a lot of states are moving away from monetary bail as we have here in California.
Jennifer, let's bring you in on this. What's your take?
Well, I understand what David is saying, and it makes a lot of sense. But we have here someone whose bail was already reduced, I think by half. I think it was $8 million initially, and down to $4 million. And he's asking for a further reduction so he can hire an expert and have Alan Jackson represent him. And I'm not so sure that that really makes sense. I agree with the judge. There are many people sitting in jail that can't afford bail, can't afford the services of a high-priced attorney. He can, but that's not really a reason to reduce his bail. So I see that. In terms of risk, I mean, this guy was traveling allegedly at over 100 miles an hour on a road with significant resources. I mean, his family does have significant resources. So as a flight risk, potentially. So I can agree with the judge as to why he's just not agreeing to reduce the bail again.
Chris, let's bring you in on this. There's obviously a lot of talk, a lot of controversy regarding bail, cashless bail. We have a situation here, a young man, he's wanting his bail reduced again. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so, and I agree with both the panelists. So I can understand why both the panelists feel that the way that they do. There should be a reform in bail. I think that it should be based on assessment instead of just, emotions. But at the same time, everybody deserves to have a bail. What that bail is, it kind of depends on the situation. Here's a situation where we have 4 young females that were murdered by doing nothing wrong. They had there was nothing that they did to put themselves in a situation where they lost their lives. And the victim, due to misjudgment, due to some sort of reasoning, is accused of being responsible for their loss of life. Now, knowing what I know about his family, knowing that they do have the means and opportunity, in order for him to become a flight risk, that all should be taken into account. But I do agree with the judge that his bail should not be lowered just because he's trying to, allocate that money towards his defense.
So Alan Jackson, he is the young man's attorney, so he is back at the center of yet another high-profile case. But we're wondering, can he capture the same magic as he did for Karen Reed? Let's listen to this.
There was no collision. There was no collision. There was no collision. You folks are the last line of defense. The last line of defense between an innocent woman and a system that has tried to break her, that falsely accused her, that tried mightily to bury the truth.
Many of us remember Jackson for representing Karen Reed during her trial, which ended in acquittals on murder and manslaughter charges. Now, he faces similar charges as he leads the defense for Fraser Michael Bohm in the sorority sisters murder case. So we're simply asking this morning, will Alan Jackson be successful again? Will he win again? Our panelists are still with us this morning. David, I'm going to start with you. Obviously, Alan Jackson has a lot of experience. He's had a lot of successes under his belt. What's your take?
Yeah, unfortunately for Alan Jackson, there's not going to be a trooper proctor in this with the text messages and the very difficult problems that the state had in Massachusetts. Here, this is an accident case. So what is really going to be important is the evidence that comes from the vehicle. The defendant was driving one of a newer vehicle. I expect that there's going to be a black box in there that will have event data evidence that will show us what the speed was shortly before the accident. Also, in the clip that we heard law enforcement asking if there's any other witnesses that had a vehicle involved in this, because obviously if there's another crack, it could be that something else caused the injuries or the accidents. And then finally, I think Jackson's going to probably go after the murder charge because there's 2 levels of culpability here in this complaint. It's a murder, which we typically look at as like a purposeful and intentional murder. In California, it requires malice, which could be expressed expressed or implied. And they're moving on implied based on the dangerous act with knowledge of risk and conscious disregard for human life. I think Jackson's going to try to bring it down to the manslaughter as opposed to the murder. Those are some thoughts that I think Jackson's thinking about right now.
Jennifer, David used the word dangerous. That stretch of roadway out there in California, people have talked about that stretch of roadway for quite some time, talking about how dangerous that stretch of road is. Will Alan Jackson be able to use that?
Well, I think it's called Dead Man's Curve, so it's, implied that it's a pretty dangerous stretch of highway. I think Alan Jackson is an excellent attorney, and I think he's going to use whatever he can. But there was a collision here, and the question is, was there a high rate of speed? One thing he may point to is that there's been other incidents, other accidents, and I don't believe alcohol was involved here. At least there's no allegations of that. And he may point to other situations where accidents of this nature, people were killed, and maybe the charges weren't so high, or the ultimate, conviction wasn't the same, wasn't murder. So he may look at other situations as well in making his defense. But you heard him on the video saying in the Karen Reed trial there was no collision. There was no collision. Here, clearly, there was a collision, and 4 lives were lost. So it's a tough situation for sure.
Chris Anderson, let's bring you in on this.
Yeah. So, I'm one of the people that never want to guess what a jury may do in a case. I never want to guess, because ultimately it'll be on the jury to make the decision, right? So here we have, on the surface, you have a vehicle. We know who the driver was. We knew that there was a high rate of speed. We know 4 people lost their lives behind it. So that's on the surface. But the underlying factors are what's going to be key. Just like David said, the black box will be important. All of the evidence that's collected at the crime scene will be important. That history of knowing that this stretch of road is known as the Dead Man's Curve will all come into play. So asking whether or not he'll be successful, is something that I'd rather not say, because I've seen cases. I've had cases where I thought it was a slam dunk case, and 2-3 weeks into trial, I'm sitting back in the back of a jury room waiting, just thinking about what I could have done better, or what could have happened, or what could have been done more in a better fashion in order to bring this to closure. So I don't want to judge on whether or not he'll be victorious again, because there are way too many underlying factors.
Absolutely.